lot of people we haven't seen for a while. Great. It's being recorded. And first of all, I wanted to say thank you to all of the Cathys and Susan and Rons and Nancy's and all of the people that worked on the elections. It takes more than a village to run an election. It takes a whole country pretty much to run an election. And I know the work is, I don't know firsthand, but I can tell that the work is really taxing and it takes a lot of time and effort, but it is all for the good. So, and then of course you all know Cathy Cella, who is our excellent newsletter editor and also very involved. Yes. Yay, Connie's giving you a hand. Connie, it's good to see you. Haven't seen you for a while. Anyway, she's an excellent newsletter editor and she knows more about elections than a lot of people in the world. So Cathy, over to you to talk about what happened in Edina. Thank you.
Thank you. I always enjoy doing this. And I will start by saying, although I've worked for the city now in elections and doing the absentee voting and then helping get things ready for the judges for over 20 years, probably close to 25 years now, I'm by no means an expert. And I see we have lots of our current judges and some of our former judges who are on with us this morning. So you will all keep me honest, I hope. So if I say things that you think I'm talking crazy, let me know. From an election perspective, this year in Edina was pretty much of a sleeper kind of an election. It was kind of boring for those of us who had to be for 45 days every day at City Hall processing voters. As you know, the Edina School Board candidates were running unopposed, and the city referendum question was not about increasing the amount or the duration of our local sales tax, but just seeking to authorize an additional sum to upgrade Braemar Arena. So, as you might suspect, turnout was low, very low. During absentee voting, through October 19th, that's the time we divide our absentee voting into sort of two time periods. One period is when people come in to vote and they actually put their ballots, we fold them up and we put them in an envelope, and then they're processed later at Hennepin County. And then the second half is what we call direct balloting, when people come in and they can actually put their own ballot into a voting machine that we have there at City Hall. So through October 19th, which was the time when people would come in and we would package up their ballot and put it in an envelope, we only had 120 people come in and vote. So we were lonely. And just as a side note, it used to be that you could only come in and put your ballot directly into a voting machine the last 6 days of an election. Direct balloting was the last 6 days. And at the 2023 legislature changed that. So now it's the last 13 days of the election. So more like 2 weeks before the election, you can do that, which is great for voters, harder for the election staff because we have a lot more paperwork and balancing to do every night when we're doing direct balloting. So it makes more work for us, but the voters, a lot of people wait until direct balloting to actually put their, to come and vote because they want to see their actual ballot go into a machine and be counted. So that's just a little side note. So during the last 13 days, when people could actually put their ballot in the machine, we have 655 voters come up to City Hall. And then there were another 231 voters who mailed in their ballots to Hennepin County. And again, that's a really low number of people just returning ballots by mail. And then finally, 4,898, so just under 500 voters, 5,000 voters voted on the actual election day on the city question. And so a total, if you add all those numbers up, a total of 5,904 people voted on the city's referendum question. And I'm going to use this number as the numbers of voters who voted in Edina because of the different pool of voters who vote in the school district election. As you know, in Edina, we also have people who live in Edina, but they vote in the Hopkins School District, the Richfield School District, and the St. Louis Park School District. So I'm just using that 5,904 total as sort of looking at, if we are looking at how many people in Edina came out to vote, we're going to use that. So at the end of the day, on election day, we had 37,668 registered voters who could vote on the question. So our turnout was only 15.7% for that. So kind of a low turnout. Of the people who voted on that city question, as I said before, 4,898 voted on election day, and a total of 1,006 if you add up who came to City Hall with an envelope, who put it in the ballot machine, and who mailed a ballot into Hennepin County. That was 1,006. So 17% of Edina voters voted early, and 83% voted on election day. And this is very atypical for an election in Edina. Usually we see a lot higher percentage of people voting early. We can be over 30% in some elections. We've been as high as like almost 35%. So a third of our people come in and vote early, but that was certainly not the case now. But you know, as I already said, in this election, I don't know that there were a lot of really burning issues that were driving people to the polls. And so a lot of people were even surprised that there wasn't an election going on in Edina. We had a lot of phone calls the last week, people going, I just heard there was election. What's that all about? So I would expect that next year our absentee numbers would be back more in line with what we usually do. But as I say, it was a very different look this year. Am I able, Julie, to share my screen? Okay. Let me do this. Let's see if I can. Can you see, can people see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this just shows the precincts in Edina, how many people actually voted in each precinct, and then the percent voting. I know people always kind of like to see that. And as you can see, the most number of voters was in precinct 7. They had 519 voters, but the highest percentage voting was precinct 16 with 21% of their voters voting. And so a lot of them were in the, 16, 17, 18% range. Sort of the two outliers at the bottom were precinct 14 and 15, which only had 10.2% and 7.8% people voting. Precinct 15, it's in the Southdale area. That is around the Southdale Library. And then precinct 14 is also in that area. That's the one that's around Centennial Lakes and Edinburgh Park. And so both of these precincts have a much higher proportion of renters than some of our other precincts, which may explain the lower percentage of voters, because the city question was just about, adding to Braemar Arena. The majority of the voters in these two districts are also in the Richfield School District and not the Edina School District. And so that might have had some effect on that as well. Looking directly at the city referendum question, and as I said before, it wasn't to increase the amount or the duration of the tax, but just to spend an additional $31.7 million in improvements to Braemar Arena. So it was the hockey question, and we had lots of people who came in and they said, I'm a hockey mom, I'm a hockey dad, I used to play hockey. So the hockey community came out in force, it seemed, to vote on this question. There were 3,903 people who voted yes and 2,001 who voted no. So it was a 66% yes, 34% no. So it passed quite easily. It passed in every precinct, but really interestingly, in precinct 1, it only passed by 5 votes. In most of the other precincts, it was closer to that 66-34 breakdown, but in precinct 1, it only won by 5 votes. Now that precinct 1 is in the far northwest corner of Edina, and it's entirely in the Hopkins School District. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it or whether the people in precinct 1 are just not a hockey hotbed of Edina. The school board results, no surprise there. The 3 candidates who were running for the 3 open spots were elected. If we take the number of votes received by the highest vote getter of the 3, and that was Elliott Mann, that was 3,529, and we guesstimate that that's about how many people voted for at least one candidate. That would mean that of the people eligible to vote in the Edina School Board election, which is a different group of people than who could vote for the city question, because I say we have different school districts in Edina. Only about 9% of the eligible voters voted in the school district election. You could also add in the number of people who had write-in for this election, and completely surprisingly, there were 677 write-in votes in the school board election. I've never seen that many write-ins for one race in my more than 20 years of doing this. And we could say that that meant that obviously people were unhappy. Maybe people were unhappy that there was, they didn't have more of a choice for who they were getting for school district. And we won't know till this afternoon. We have to tally those write-ins for the county, whether they were some serious write-in candidates, like they were actually picking people who might be good school board candidates, or whether it's the usual. We always get a lot of people who write in people like Mickey Mouse and Batman and that kind of stuff, or their next door neighbor. So it'll be interesting to see this afternoon what the trend is there. But if you said, well, of the people who did a write-in, they didn't vote for one of the candidates and they did a write-in instead, and maybe only did one write-in. Even if I added all those votes into the total, that would still be only 10% of the people voted in the school board. So, but again, a lot of people figured that there was not much to vote on, and so that was not driving voters to the polls. And that, as I said, there were only about 3,500 was the most votes cast in that election, which is about 2,500 less than the top, that went and voted for the city question. But again, the voting pools are different. So not the same voters were necessarily voting for those questions. But some people came in and only voted for the city question and didn't even vote in the school election. So as I said before, Elliott Mann got the most votes with 3,529. Cheryl Berry had 3,440, and Jennifer Huey had 3,229. So there's really only a difference of 300 votes between the top vote getter and the third place. And so the vote totals between them were, the margins were very small. And although Mann won 12 of the precincts, tied in precinct 6, and lost precincts 11, 14, and 15, all the vote differentials were so small that you really couldn't look at that and see that there were any trends about who voted for who. And again, because there wasn't a lot of, it wasn't going to make a lot of difference. You look at those vote totals and you really don't see anything that stands out. Susan?
Well, I mean, precinct 14, which I was a head judge for, it is mainly senior citizens. I mean, I'm using that term politely. But I mean, we only distributed about 18 ballots for District 273.
Yeah.
And all the rest of the ballots we issued for 280. So that's
right. Yes, because that is one of our precincts where the majority of those people are in the Richfield School District. So yeah. So again, yeah, there were so few votes. I mean, you can't even really see any trend. But thanks for pointing that out. If we look at some tidbits from other jurisdictions around where we are, just to see what else, people who had more exciting elections maybe than we did this time. As we were talking before we started this morning when we were gathering, St. Louis Park elected the first Somali American mayor in the United States. That's 27-year-old St. Louis Park Council member Nadia Mohammed. Actually, South Portland, Maine has had a Somali American mayor since 2021, but that mayor also a woman, was chosen by the other council members to serve as mayor, because that's the way they do it in South Portland, Maine. And she was not elected by the voters of the city to the post of mayor. So that's a first in our neighboring community of St. Louis Park. People who are interested in ranked choice voting might have been watching the Minnetonka elections as well. Minnetonka, as some of you may know, is one of the 5 cities in Minnesota with ranked choice voting. And voters approved that for city elections back in 2020, but it was back on the ballot this year with a question asking the voters if they wanted to repeal ranked choice voting in Minnetonka. And the voters voted 58.7% to 41.3% to keep ranked choice voting. So it will continue in Minnetonka, although only about 40% of the city's eligible voters voted on the question. So even that didn't drive people to the polls more than about 40%. And interestingly, if you were following that, the current mayor and several past mayors in Minnetonka were very vocal in not supporting ranked choice voting. So, and because we're talking about ranked choice voting right now, I'll put in a plug for the League of Women Voters evening event next Thursday at Edina City Hall, because we have 2 really great speakers who are going to discuss ranked choice voting. Katie Smith, who's the director of elections for Minneapolis, and David, I never know that if I'm saying his
Maeda,
who is the director of elections for the Secretary of State's office in Minnesota. So they'll both be talking about ranked choice voting. So if you're interested in that topic, it should be a great evening. In St. Paul, which is one of the other Minnesota cities with ranked choice voting, no official results are in yet. You might have been following, Minneapolis was already able to call their elections, because Minneapolis also has ranked choice voting for their city elections. They were able to call their elections yesterday morning, so the morning after. St. Paul is still tabulating, and so we don't know the outcome. But preliminary indications are that voters there might elect the first all-female city council in St. Paul. So that is something to look at or watch for. And then in national news, voters in Ohio voted to guarantee access to abortion in the Ohio state constitution. And that passed 56.6% to 43.4%. And if you look at the map of Ohio voters, that was very, very much an urban versus rural vote. All around the cities, people voted, the big cities in Ohio, they voted in favor, and all the rural counties did not. So that's all the stuff I have on what happened in 2023, because actually from an election perspective, what's going to happen in 2024 is much more exciting. And so we're going to have 5 elections in Edina next year, so you'll have plenty of time to vote. I'm going to share my screen again and show you, if I can find it. Why do I not have this? Oh. Let's see if I can. Just gonna go see what happened to
Are
that.
you talking about the map
No.
or the calendar you did?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have one. I can't show it to you. So
No, I have it and I have it ready to go. I just need to
While she's doing that, why don't we see if the participants know what those 5 elections are? Besides the general election in November, of course, what are some of the other 4? Anybody want to try to guess at those?
well, I can't because I've already looked at the
Okay,
grid.
then you're excluded. It looks like Nancy might have a comment.
well, it might be there must gonna be some kind of primary election before the big election, right?
Mhm.
Presidential primaries, yes.
Or I don't know what other people running will have.
Think more local for a few minutes.
Chris Latandra's election replacement.
Hennepin County Commissioner, yes.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
And there's a primary on that one too. The primary is
Okay,
April
now can
3rd.
we see it?
Oh, you got it? No,
I
not
got
yet.
it. Do you see
There
it?
it is. There it is. Thank you. Great.
Okay, so you can see how this looks, and all the colored bars are times when we're going to actually be open for voting in either for a special election, a primary. So those are the times when people will actually be at City Hall helping voters. And you can see that starting in the January, those of us who work there, we're going to have March, a bit of March off and a little bit of June off. And other than that, we're going to be doing elections.
Cathy,
So,
can you say which election is which?
yes, I'm going to go through that. First, I just wanted to give you the overview. When all the election staff saw that calendar, we all gulped. So here are the 5 elections that we have next year. We start with the presidential primary, and voting for that. That's the first one you see that's all in the blue. And the actual presidential primary going to the polls is March 5th. But early voting starts on January 19th. And unlike in our state and local primaries that we're used to, as we recall the last time we did one of these, each party will have a separate ballot. And only major parties, as defined by Minnesota law, will have a ballot. And at this point, that will be the DFL, the Republican, and the Legal Marijuana Now parties. So possibility of 3 ballots. And as you recall, that's one where you have to come in and you have to tell the election judge which ballot you want. Everything is not on the same ballot. So that's that election. Then we're going to possibly have a primary for the special election to replace Hennepin County Commissioner Chris LaTendresse, the District 6 commissioner. He resigned, as you recall, because he became head of Beacon Housing. District 6 includes Deep Haven, Edina, Excelsior, Greenwood, Hopkins, Long Lake, Minnetonka, Minnetonka Beach, Mound, Northern Eden Prairie, Orono, Shorewood, Spring Park, Tonka Bay, Woodland, and Wayzata. So it's, the western suburbs. And a primary is going to be necessary if more than 2 candidates file for the office. The primary, if necessary, will be held on April 30th. That's the first part of the green lines. So far, 6 candidates have indicated they plan to run, although the filing period doesn't really open until February 27th, and it doesn't close, I think, until like March 12th or March 14th. So we really won't know until then how many candidates are going to run. But if we take the fact that 6 have already indicated they'd like to run, it looks like we'll probably have a primary. The interesting thing about the people who have indicated they're going to run, and again, as I say, it doesn't mean they're going to file, but they have said they wanted to run, are Dario Anselmo, Heather Edelson, Alicia Gibson, Carolyn Jackson, Janet Katui, and Jen Westmoreland. All 6 of them live in Edina, which is just sort of given all those suburbs that I mentioned that are part of District 6, all 6 who said they want to run are Edina residents. So if we do have a primary, I would assume that perhaps voting will be high turnouts in Edina because more people will know them, and there'll be more interest in that election. At this point, the Hennepin County website doesn't really indicate when the absentee voting would be start for the primary. That April 12th date that you see on the calendar, that's what they were going to start absentee voting if they didn't have a primary. That was the absentee voting for that general election for the county commissioner. So they're having the primary on April 30th if they need it. And then the general election for that will be May 14th, 2 weeks later. And so, as I said, supposedly if there was no primary, you would start absentee balloting. So as a side note, this election was general election was originally scheduled for April 9th, but it was changed because it conflicts with the Muslim holy day, Eid al-Fitr. And they, under Minnesota law, you can only use certain dates for special elections. And once April 9th was off the table, which was the original date, the next choice was May 14th, which is why it's then. And then in late breaking news that I heard yesterday, they may, if we do a primary, there's at least one calendar that shows that we would start early voting for the May 14th election on May 6th, which
Oh,
would give us
God.
about a 1-week turnaround before we stopped the primary and started early voting for the general. And that would be just a week of early voting. So it all could be very interesting. And if you think that's all complicated, the person who's elected on May 14th will only serve through December 31st. So they have to run for re-election in November. So we're going to run possibly 2 elections for somebody who's going to serve for 6 months. So interesting. Then we have our regular primary, which is August 13th. That's the orange lines, and the early voting for that will start June 28th. Now that election could also be interesting from a primary standpoint, because there are already indications that Don Samuels will file to run against Ilhan Omar, as he did in 2022. And if you recall, she only beat him by about 2 percentage points in the primary. She won the election quite handily over her challenger, but the primary was close. So we don't, and as I say, preliminary indications are that Samuel says he's going to run against her again. So that could be an interesting primary for those in Edina who live in Congressional District 5. And then for those of us who live in Congressional District 3, as we know, Dean Phillips is currently running for president. And we don't know if he will file to retain his House seat. He doesn't have to make that decision until June. That's the end of the filing period. But already Ron Harris, who's a member of the Democratic National Committee, has announced he's going to run. Although interestingly, he doesn't live in the district right now. He lives right outside the district. Other names that have been floated are the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, DFL Senator Kelly Morrison. She's in Senate District 45, which is the district that if you looked at a map of Lake Minnetonka and then just kind of drew a bigger circle all around Lake Minnetonka, that's her district. And then also DFL House member Zach Stevenson, and he represents House District 35A, which is Anoka and Coon Rapids. So that primary could be interesting to the voters depending on who files for various seats. And then we have the 2024 general election on November 5th, with absentee voting starting on September 20th. And that's the purple election that you see up on the screen. On that ballot will be the U.S. president, one of our U.S. senators, because Amy Klobuchar's seat's up for re-election, and of course, all 8 of our Minnesota congressional seats, and the House of Representatives for the state of Minnesota. So really not much on that ballot at all. Not an interesting election at all, but yes, it will be. And so I'm sure the turnout will be huge for a presidential election. So here's my plug for anybody who might be interested in being an election judge at one of our precincts, or who might be interested in helping us out at City Hall with absentee voting. Because as you can see, we're going to be really, really busy next year. We are training in some new people to help process voters using the state voting system. But during the last 2 weeks of every election, we can use people to, as we say, work the lobby. And that's just making sure that people have the right forms and other documents, or you're signing in dropped off ballots, or answering questions, and generally keeping things under control and moving. So if anybody is interested in doing that for next year, you can just shoot me an email.
So Kathy, there are some jurisdictions that have gone to part-time election judges. Is Edina going to be employing part-time election judges, or is everybody volunteering to work those elections going to be needed to work full-time?
We were just talking about that, and it looks like, I think that we will be, not everyone at a precinct would be a part, could do a half-day shift, but it looks like they will be going to some part-time, some half-day shifts, because it is hard for people to get there at 6 in the morning and stay till close at 8 o'clock. So yes, I would say, I can't say with 100% certainty, but I would, if I was betting, I would bet that that is what is going to happen. We are also looking at, for next year, copying something that Minneapolis does, and training in some people to be poll book specialists. If you've ever been to the, well, if you've served as an election judge, you know that one of the jobs is poll book judge. And as you go in to vote, the people who run those iPads when you come in, some people like to do that and some people don't. They don't feel as comfortable. Minneapolis now gives people who like to do it more training in that. And then they basically work the poll books the entire day, so that you have the people who really like it and have extra training. And I think we probably will think about trying to start implementing that system. We may not get enough people who want to be poll book specialists, but if that would be something you'd be interested in, you could be an election judge and specifically trained to do that. Any other questions? Otherwise, I don't have anything else to say. It wasn't that exciting.
Kathy?
Yes.
So I've forgotten the name now, but there was someone who said who filed, who doesn't live in the district.
Mhm.
So how does that work? Does he have to move? How can he do that?
He didn't file. Nobody's filed yet. No
You
filing
said,
periods are open.
okay.
He's just kind of, as people do, indicated their interest. They throw their hat in the ring to see like what happens and who else is going to come. So no, they're not at the that filing period probably won't open until late April or early May and runs through June. So that's down the road. That's more than 6 months down the road.
Would this person have to live in the district by the time he filed, if he is going to do that?
I believe the answer is no. I believe you have to live in the district when you serve, but I think there was an election in Wisconsin last year that involved someone who did not live in the district in which they were running for Congress. But I defer to anybody with superior knowledge. This is just my reading.
Yeah, I don't, and I did not look that up. I should have. I apologize. I did not.
It's okay. It just sounds kind of strange to me.
Mm-hmm. He lives very close. He claims he lives 1 mile outside the district.
Well, they're not going to redistrict, so.
Kathy, I'm sorry, they're cleaning my gutters. If someone is interested in becoming an election judge, should they contact Sharon Allison, or how should people do that?
If they're interested in becoming an election judge, you could go on the city's website and there's an online application to fill out. And it's just a couple of short questions, and you can do that because we'll start training judges again for people who will start training again in January, but we'll be training at several points during 2024 as people, because I know in Minnesota a lot of people will be gone in January or choose not to work in January. So we need judges for all 5 of those elections.
Mhm.
I think Connie had her hand up, Kathy.
Yes, I was wondering if the rule or the law is that if you want to recall someone or have a special election, you just need a certain percentage of the voters who voted in the last election. Is that still the rules or the law? I'm just thinking, I think we wanted always to have a large turnout so that couldn't happen very easily, but a certain percentage of it would be a fewer number of people. Are you familiar with that?
I would assume that those rules are going to be different depending on what office you're elected to and, at what level, if it's state, federal. or local, that all those recall rules are going to be specific to that level of government. So I don't know generally.
I think the school boards are getting very, very contentious in other areas, and we didn't have very many, but I've heard of, I think Anoka School District had 2 people that were elected that were not the usual type. I mean, they were just there for a certain reason. I'm not sure about that. That's just what I heard, and I was wondering if we didn't have that in Edina, but how about school board elections? If you could recall somebody that's on a school board. You don't know anything specific
I
about
do
that?
not. I never looked into that. I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't know the answer.
No, it's kind of a minute point, but with the fewer people voting on these at this time, it's something to think about, maybe.
Ellen, a former school board member, has her hand up.
Yeah, but I'm not responding to that. I don't know anything more about that than you do,
Okay.
Connie. So,
No, we've got 3
Um,
former school board members
yeah.
on the call, and none of us know the answer to that one.
yeah, sorry. But I have another question, and I know that this sounds kind of like into the weeds, but I was looking on the Secretary of State's website when after the election, trying to figure out percentage of all registered voters who actually voted. And when I look on that page, and I know unless you actually go to it and look at the results from Edina School Board, if you look at the number of voters registered up in the upper right corner, it says 30,255 were registered at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then you click on results from precincts, the number changes to 41,000 voters registered. And I'm just wondering why there would be a difference in number.
There is a difference always between when we open the polls, we always know our 7 a.m. snapshot, how many people are registered to vote in our precincts as of that time when we open the polls. But then we do add in people who register on election day. So your numbers will always go up between the 7 a.m. open and the 8 p.m. close. So when you're running your percentages, and it doesn't make a big difference in an election like this because not that many people, I think we only had 111 election day registrations for this election. So it doesn't really change the numbers. In a presidential election, when more people come out to vote, the election day registration numbers can change the number of registered voters enough that when you're running your, doing your percentage calculations, it may change your turnout percentage by, a couple of percentage points. I saw that 41,000 number when I looked at it yesterday, and I said, there is something off about that because there are not, the Edina School District is smaller than the city of Edina, and we only have 37,000, just under 38,000 voters who could vote for the city referendum question. So there's no way there could be 41,000 voters in the school district. And I was just thinking that maybe what they were doing, because you will see that there are some precincts in Bloomington that are included because we do have a couple of people who the reverse of people who live in Edina and vote in Hopkins School District. They live in Bloomington and they vote in the Edina School District. And I'm thinking my best guess is that the state's system pulls in the entire amount of people who vote in those precincts in Bloomington and counted them as registered voters because they didn't know how many families exactly were just the Edina families in that school district. Because we often, because the state keeps their districts, their statistics and their numbers by precincts, and they're not looking at school districts. So my best guess is that 41,000 number includes a bunch of people in Bloomington who aren't Edina voters and they're not Edina School District voters either. Does
Yeah.
that make sense to you?
That makes, they're both labeled voters registered at 7 a.m. So I think that the timing is not the answer for why there's a discrepancy, but I do think that the other one makes a little more sense. And
Yeah, but I don't know. That's just my best guess.
yeah, okay. Thanks.
Linda?
I had a comment on Connie's comment in that about people that are voting in an election where there really is no contest. You've got 3 people voting for 3 slots. I always think that it's really important to vote in a situation like that, because you never know, and I know maybe this is a little paranoid, but that you have a real subversive write-in campaign that could people, because we had a lot of write-ins on this particular election, that if there was a concerted effort to put somebody in who really wasn't vetted by, the populace, that you had a write-in campaign that could take it over. So I think it's always important to vote, even if there is uncontested or appears to be uncontested.
And also, it's important to vote because look, Andrea Jenkins won by 38 or 36 votes. I mean, if anybody says it doesn't matter to vote, well, it does. I mean, that was a pretty close election for her.
Well, and in the past, one school board election in Edina was decided by 15 votes.
Mm-hmm.
So it can get quite close. There also was the school board election where a couple of candidates in Edina withdrew, but after the deadline to withdraw, and one of them I think got over 800 votes, and one of them got well over 1,000 candidates who, for one reason or another, including things that came out during the campaign. So really important to vote.
And to know who you're voting for.
Which is why it's so wonderful that the League of Women Voters does local candidate forums.
Yes.
And all of those elections that are coming up, we'll be doing local candidate forums for those too, especially, and Susan and I were going to talk about that after this election, about candidate forums for the Hennepin County Commissioner. That's going to be huge. And so we'll do that. We'll have to work on that. And it is important. And I will send that information that was in the Star Trib the other day. I'll send the link to Julie, and then we can share it with our members in case they hadn't seen it. A good press for the League of Women Voters, Minnesota.
Thank you. I have actually one more question for Cathy, and I'm curious. I think this was the last year the city is going to be running the school board elections. And when I hear about how much expertise is involved in this and making sure that you have the staffing and the keeping tallies and everything, do you have any idea? Are you aware if the school district is thinking about continuing to run off election cycle elections, or if they're going to shift to running them during regular election times?
I have no idea. I think that originally they were going to have to do much more shadowing of this election because that wasn't going to include a city question. And so they were, it was going to be more just a school district election. And I think they were going to come in and try to figure out more maybe what was necessary. But I think once the city put a ballot question on, it became a city election and a school district election. And frankly, we weren't busy enough during the early voting times we weren't busy enough at City Hall that it would have been very difficult, not very difficult, but it's harder to train people in and try to give them the lay of the land if you're not really doing stuff. But they still have,
and they weren't shadowing on election day.
No.
not that I'm aware of. They could have been somewhere else, not that I'm aware of at City Hall, but you know, they still have 2 years because they don't have to run their own election until 2025. So, and I don't know what they're going to decide. And so, you know, it's not like it's something that they have to be ready to do in January.
I wonder if they'd have to buy all their own voting equipment.
No,
No.
I believe that they use they use the city's equipment. My understanding is that's in school districts where they do that they have an arrangement with the city, because yeah, it would be ridiculous to buy all that equipment.
Do they train their own election judges for the school board elections if they hold them?
That people are asking questions that would be hard for anyone to answer. I'm sorry, but I mean, it's really, we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. So
because we've for so long in Edina, that is not the way it's been done. So we don't know what the
right, yeah,
how that would work.
I had a question about the city referendum or whatever they called it. Wasn't a referendum, was it? Or
Yeah.
it was a referendum. Okay. So if this didn't pass, and I thought I read somewhere it isn't going to add anything to this, the sales tax isn't adding anymore. It's just going to maybe prolong it longer. Does the city sales tax go away if they don't have any more projects, or are we going to be voting on other projects to use the city sales tax?
Well, you have to start from the understanding that the city can't ask the voters to approve a project for which to use that tax unless they got authorization by the legislature. So the Minnesota legislature voted in 2022 to allow Edina to impose a sales tax of 0.5% and up to 19 years. And to use it for, the first time it was for improvements to Braemar Park trails and stuff, and some stuff with Braemar Arena, and then money to redevelop Fred Richards as a park. And that's what we voted on in 2022, and then they went back in 2023 and said, could we use some more money, 31.7 million, for Braemar Arena specifically? And the legislature had to pass a bill saying yes, and then they can take it to the voters. So unless they go back to the legislature and have a specific project that the legislature will approve, they can't ask the voters to spend money on anything else. And it's my understanding that under the type of sales tax that we're using in Edina, the projects have to have a regional impact. You have to be able to show that it's something that will benefit the region and not just your local community. So that's why it's things like parks and Braemar Arena, because more people than just people in Edina use the Braemar golf course and the trails, and they'll come to Fred Richards, and everybody from all over the state uses Braemar Arena.
Okay, so if it had not passed, does the sales tax go away then? If it's all they finished the funding, and then does it go away then if you don't have any more projects that are approved? You know what I mean, or not? So eventually,
our presenter last month was Scott Neal, and we did record that presentation. So that and a number of other questions like that were asked. Not to send you on a.
No, that's okay. Yeah. Okay.
But yes, I mean, they can only use the money that the voters voted for. So there still would be quite a bit of money to be collected and spent. It wouldn't go away. It would not have gone away instantaneously because the uses that were authorized by last year's votes still would have existed until
They
that
haven't-
money was raised and spent.
They haven't finished paying for the improvements they've done.
Right, because last year we approved about, what was it, about 70 million or I'm trying to remember adding up those numbers.
I don't know.
So they collect the tax on an ongoing basis, and so until they pay for all the bonds that they, sell to get the cash on hand to do that, then they'll keep collecting the tax. And it's hard to say without knowing what their monthly collections are, how long it's going to take them to pay all that off. It might be less than the 19 years. And then theoretically, as I would understand it, but I don't, I'm not an expert on this, is that unless they'd authorize other uses, that then there would be no necessity to collect it anymore.
And
That's my question, when it's paid off, like say it's paid off in 10 years, would there be like, 9 years we wouldn't collect it then? Or does it just go into a fund that we could use at some time, or Edina could use sometime if they come up with a project?
I believe that that Scott Neal said that what was approved in 2022 and 2023 would cover what they expect to generate from the sales tax in the 19 years. That's, I believe, and Joni, or if you understood differently, I don't have that right in front of me, but I think he said that would pretty much cover what they plan to, but it could change. My guess, and this is my guess, is that if there was any extra available, the city would come up with something to go to the legislator to get it approved to use whatever was left. But I could be wrong about that.
Well, and I think that that Scott Neal would probably welcome an email question if somebody has a specific questions like that. But I also want to put in a shameless pitch for the league's YouTube page. Julie does a wonderful job of adding meetings that we record to that page. And there are some meetings archived. We had a Supreme Court expert speak, our keynote speaker, as we were coming back from the pandemic in 2022. And his comments still are timely. He talked about the US Supreme Court, still the most dangerous branch of government. There is a video about Minnesota's new assisted living law. We were the last state in the United States to regulate assisted living facilities, and that video has been viewed over 100 times. I think people are sending friends there as they have some questions about the impact of the law. So just know that there are some answers in the recorded meetings that League has on its YouTube page.
And Christine
I took some notes from Scott Neal's conversation, and I think just in a nutshell, he said they had estimated $350,000 to be collected monthly, and what they're finding in reality is about $500,000. And he did say that it's expected to go on a collection for 19 years unless that money is collected before that time. So I got the impression that it would not continue. And then with regard to the dollar amounts, phase 2, which just passed, is 31.7 million. Phase 1 that was passed in November of 2022 was 39.3 million.
Yeah. Thanks, Kristen.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I tried to read it, I don't know how many times, and I couldn't figure out if it didn't pass, would we just be having the money come in anyway and use it like I don't know, get another project going and trying to get it approved? Or I was curious, or I was having trouble why you have to do it. I know they didn't get it all approved at one time and all that. But if they have more money than they collect, or they collect more money than they use, you kind of have the feeling they'll come up with a project that would use it up.
Because and if you take Christine's numbers that she was so wonderful to take such good notes from Scott Neal's presentation, if they're collecting $500,000 a month now, is that what you said, Christine?
Mhm. Yep.
That would be what, $6 million a year. And if you take that times 19 years, that's like 115-ish million. And what we've just quoted as to the projects they're doing were like, what, under 70 million. So
Yeah.
there is something more on top of what they've already said they're going to spend. And if they continue to collect at a rate of, 500,000 a month, so there would be more, and so theoretically it could end sooner, but yeah, as we say, we don't know if they'll go back and ask for other projects.
So the next time we have city elections, you should probably read what they're what the people running are saying about what they'll use the tax for in maybe 15 years or so. Yeah.
I probably won't be asking those questions in 15 years. Somebody else will.
Educate those somebody else's, huh?
Yeah.
Well, Cathy, thank you so much. That was great information. It's always good to hear. And I kind of thought, oh, wow, there won't be too much to talk about. But I really appreciated the 5 elections coming up next year. It's going to be busy. We're going to be just going everywhere. And one question that I have, and I'm not sure, Susan, you may have an answer to this. Somebody that I exercise with lives in St. Louis Park. She voted early in person, and her husband, who lives in the same place, got a different ballot than she did because the area they live in is like in the Hopkins School District, and she didn't have the Hopkins School Board to vote on or something. And I thought, that would seem like there was a mistake somewhere, because in the precinct that you serve, Susan, you have those that vote for Richfield School District, and then also some that vote for Edina School District. Yes or no?
Well, there was only one ballot pack for 273, and there were 9 ballot packs for 280.
Okay.
And so, yes, I mean, yes, but I mean, if that happened to me, I would say what? And I mean, but they're not going to go back and claw back, or I mean, they might have.
Here's the most likely explanation, because at City Hall, we have to have the ballots for all 16 of our precincts, and 8 of our precincts in Edina are split between school districts. So in 8 of our precincts, you have to be very careful when we're checking in a voter that we know what the state computer system tells us what school district they're in. And then we have to pull them 1 of 2 ballots. And we had our system set up so we had all the Edina 273s on the top of our thing, and then down below, if it was not 273, on the little tags for our ballots was in a different color, and they were the different school districts. And so we tried to be very careful that you pulled the right ballot, because if you don't pull the right ballot, the person's not getting to vote for what they're supposed to. If they actually lived in the same house and got a different ballot,
something happened.
Something happened. It could be because if you lived on opposite sides of the street, I might say, well, the line might go right down the street, and that could be very, like they lived in the same house. It sounds more like what a bad ballot pull.
Right. And they voted 2 different ways. One went in person and one, so there could be that. Anyway, she was concerned, and I was happy that she even asked the question, not that I could answer it, but it was kind of, it's interesting. Minnesotans do generally care about elections, which is really nice to see, or if there's something interesting about some. Joni.
There are homes in the Northeast. I live in Morningside, that little square on top of the square of Edina. And there are some homes on the edge that are actually in both St. Louis Park and Edina. And what my understanding is people are instructed to vote where they sleep. That your bedroom location determines your voting jurisdiction.
Oh my gosh.
Wow,
Or
that's
they try, whenever they redistrict, they try to solve those problems where the line goes right down the middle of something. We notoriously had that one apartment building in Edina where the line went right down the middle of the building. And so depending on what apartment you lived in, you were in a different school district, which as you can believe, the election judges in that area and those of us working at City Hall, that just drove everyone crazy. And particularly then there were a couple of people, which is just kind of a funny side note, where people like got 2 apartments and they, you know, put them to, they were allowed to make them bigger. And then it was like, I don't know, it was that am I in which school district am I voting? And that was, yeah, which is your bedroom in was exactly the answer.
wow.
But we always, as election workers, one of the things you always, you know, obsess about is making sure that you pull the right ballot. Because if you make a mistake, I mean, some voters might catch you, but it may not happen. And so we are, like at the end of the day for when we do direct balloting, I have to tally all our ballots against what the state voter system said. So we know immediately then if we pulled a bad ballot during the day. And so we're very careful about that. And people only we want to have 0 mistakes. So we're, and when we do catch that is, then, you know, we gather the staff and, you know, say bad ballot pull, you know, we got to stop it. So we try to be very careful.
One thing also around the Hennepin County Commissioner's special election, as you said, all of the people that are intending to run live in Edina. Westmoreland lives in Northwest Edina in the Hopkins School District, and I believe she's the chair of the Hopkins School Board. So that's an interesting little twist because she is an Edina resident. Yeah.
Is it okay if I put in a pitch for upcoming morning meetings so people know what's coming up in December and January? Next month, we have MJ Lehman speaking on the evolution of boards and commissions in the city of Edina. And people may know that the league did a really important study back in 2005, 2006. At the time, 61% of board and commission members were male. There were no term limits. Some people had served for 30 years on boards and commissions. And after the league made its report and recommendations, there were a number of changes made, including term limits. And as the years have gone on, there have been even more changes made to process. The commissions are much more diverse than they used to be. So it's timely. We haven't heard an update in about 3 years from the city, what's happening with boards and commissions, but that will be the morning meeting topic in December. And then in January, Secretary of State Steve Simon is going to speak on the impact of misinformation on elections. And so real important meeting, and you may want to invite friends to attend with you. Ranked choice voting coming up in person at City Hall on the 16th, and hope to see folks there. Thanks. Oh, and Sunday, the Human Rights and Relations Commission is putting on building an inclusive community, and some excellent speakers, including Bill Zerluga from Before Racism, talking about early childhood education, Franny Bakar from the school district, talking about multicultural education in K-12 in Edina, and then Anthony Walsh speaking about inclusiveness in youth sports.
And there is not an evening meeting in December. We decided that would be a good time to just let everybody relax. And so we're having the morning meeting, but not the evening in December.
Joni, do you have those dates in front of you? The morning meeting?
For the morning meetings, I think is it the 14th in December?
That sounds right. I just wanted to double check.
And January, I'd have to dig out my calendar. I don't know if anybody has that January morning date. Just one second.
second Thursday of the month.
Yes,
So you can do that.
That would
Barb.
be the 11th.
Okay, second Thursday, January 11 would
11.
be,
Yep.
sound right? Okay.
Yep. And then the January evening meeting is going to be actually a happy hour that is going to discuss the positions and advocacy work.
Exactly. So lots of good things coming up. And I will, any other comments, questions, concerns?
Nope.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes, that was great.
Thank you for having me back. I'm enough of an election nerd that I enjoy doing that.
Good. We appreciate that. Everyone have a good day and enjoy the sunshine and wind. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Bye.
sort of.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Do we think that went okay?
Oh, it was excellent.
Yeah, it was very
Okay,
good.
good.
And
There just wasn't a lot to talk about for Edina, except for the 2024 stuff was much more interesting to me than the 2020.
oh yeah, it is. And I think that
Yeah.
we're gonna start the monthly in January, just talking about the elections that will be coming up in 2024. I mean, that would be because people don't know that. How in the world can you have a primary April 30th and a special election on the 14th? How do you get the ballots done? Oy, oy, oy.
I know, because they won't know until, the night of April 30th, who to put on the ballot for the 14th. And they claim I'm going to start early voting people on the 6th. I mean, and
Wow.
from an election perspective, you have to clear everything out of all the machines. We have to get those, and then we have to retest all the machines with the new ballots. I mean, there's a testing process with ballots. I mean, yeah, it'll just be one ballot, but it's still, that's going to be really hard to turn around in
Oh my.
6 days, or it's even
Why?
going to be hard to turn around in 2 weeks. I just don't
Yeah.
know what they're thinking.
Why is it such a late special election when he announced his resignation in August?
There's only some days that they can have. There's only 4 or 5 days in a year that you can have a
Oh,
special.
okay.
Right, and so to get, and I think that because everybody, Minneapolis and Hennepin County, people were already geared up to do the election in November. It was like, we're not thinking of that till after November. And then, yeah, you only have so many dates, and they have the presidential primary that is gonna be a big election, and people are really gonna be concentrating on that in January, February, and then early March. So then, they picked that April 9th date, which would make sense, because right after, I mean, still that was going to mean right after the presidential primary, everybody was just going to flip and go to that. But then they had to move that because of the holy day. So,
Yeah.
it's,
I just can't. And we will, I would bet money we're going to have a primary for the Hennepin County Commissioner, because Carolyn's already raising money, and Heather is, and Dario, I don't know, I think he is. He's certainly campaigning. So we'll have a primary for sure.
oh,
There is
absolutely.
a trend of legislators becoming county commissioners. Former city council people, legislators, I think people who are used to doing a lot of work for not much money. And this represents, I think, kind of a promotion, certainly in terms of pay and working hours.
And city council for Edina, there'd be 2 people plus the mayor running in 2024. 3 seats, yeah, the mayor and 2 council people. And if Carolyn Jackson won the Hennepin County Commissioner, would we have to have a special election to fill her position that she vacates on the city council? Or
Edina's practice in the past has been to fill vacancies with appointment.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
and even when Jim Hovland was elected mayor in 2004, Alice Hulbert was then appointed to fill his unexpired term for 2 years.
And so the city
This is-
ordinances allow to a point, is there like a time limit that says if the term is longer than X months, that you have to go to an election? I know that's the way the school district does it. It's like you can appoint for up to, you know, so many months, but once it's longer than a year, you have to have an election.
Well, so again, Alice served for 2 years.
Ooh, so I guess not.
Until the next election. I mean, she was appointed sometime in the winter of 2005, and her term ran through the end of 2006. But, and then I came on in January 2007, and I do not recall that we changed rules during that time.
Well, then, yeah, then maybe the city doesn't have to do that, but I just think to spend all that money and time for someone who's only going to be in the seat for 6 months.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, it's going to be crazy busy.
It's going to be interesting to hear about what the voter percentages were in places like, you know, Bloomington, Minnetonka, because in Minnetonka, I've been following all the different races on the Star Tribune site. I haven't been going to the Secretary of State's site, but it looks like one of the incumbent council members in Minnetonka may end up losing her seat in the second or third ballot. And so of the three elections that were determined through ranked choice counting in Minneapolis yesterday, none of them had more than 50% of the vote. None of the declared winners had more than 50% of the vote.
Wait, that's not, you mean?
Well, they have to at the end when they redistribute.
No, they don't. That's one of the things about ranked choice voting that is, you know, part of confusing or part of the misinformation. Fry has never had over 50% or more of the vote. Fry's been elected mayor twice.
But it's just at the end when they're done redistributing however many choices you have, whoever has the most votes, even if it's not more than 50%.
Correct. So you've got 48%. In fact, there were two people in the Jenkins election. What was it, Ward 8, with Soren. Because they're so close, they're both at 48%, and so she will have won at 48% with that small ratio.
And I heard yesterday that the number of votes that she won by is small enough that it's within an automatic recount if he requests it, but he has to request it. One of the candidates has to request it.
And he hasn't determined if he's going to request it or not.
It's 30 some votes.
It was 38 or 36.
And and this is within the tolerance that the city would have to pay for it, because there's another tolerance that's a little bit higher that you can request it, but you have to pay for it as a candidate. But the city would pay for it if he required it, apparently.
Joni, a lot of the candidates came in over 50% at the beginning. I mean, right away.
So there were a number of candidates who won significantly. Robin Wansley in Ward 2 ran unopposed and still there were like 30% of the votes write-in against her. I think I don't quote me exactly on percentage, but there was a significant write-in against. But I think, to me, one of the questions is, what do you end up with for voter percentage? You know, because fairly significant elections, and do you draw enough voters that, in terms of feeling like there's a valid result, are enough people participating? We see such high percentage of participation in general election years that is a question to me about those off-year elections.
Joni, are you sure that Andrew Jenkins didn't have over 50.1% after they did all of the right? Because
according to final result on the Star Tribune's webpage is 48% for each of the candidates. In Ward 7, Lisa Goodman's old ward, Scott Graham and Katie Cashman, in that one, by the time all the ballots were counted, you know, the rounds of counting, she then had 51%. So that was one of the ranked choice, one of the elections that went to multiple ballots that ended with more than 48%.
Right.
But also the guy in, I think it's Ward 6, the guy whose wife has now been implicated in the Feeding Our Future, is Osman, I think might be his last
Yeah,
name.
Osman.
Anyway, he's also, I think, finished under 50%, one under 50%.
Well, but Minneapolis certainly got the numbers counted rather quickly. I don't know why St. Paul is lagging so far behind. I mean,
Well, it'll be a
it's
good question. They set their own rules and they don't even look. It was announced on election night that they would not even go to that next round until Friday. There
yeah.
was something about that, because there were a couple of things I think that were decided sooner. Yeah, Minneapolis was quick, relatively quick, and it'll be interesting to have, to hear Katie Smith's explanation of how they get their results faster. But Minnetonka and Bloomington, I checked yesterday and I think they still hadn't declared. It looks like in both instances, I think Bloomington and Minnetonka, it looks like an incumbent might lose a seat after they count the other rounds.
Well, that was a big loss for Emily Larson in Duluth.
Oh,
Wow. That was,
And
yeah.
it wasn't close.
No, it wasn't.
oh, no.
Not- No, Jane Hovland, who I'm co-chair of membership for LWVMN with, she's the neighbor of Emily. And I said, oh, it looks like she's behind. That was Tuesday night. And she responded and said, yeah, she lost. And she said, I hope she runs again because she's really good. But, they're going more moderate, where Minneapolis is apparently going more progressive, according to the news. Who knows?
There's also a question, I think, too, it could be the direction of the voters. It's always a question of who shows up to vote, who's motivated. It looks like a pretty high turnout in Duluth. But the other question is, what do people have as their guide for multiple terms? Are people thinking 2 terms is good? We want someone else, or we want you to be done. Because I don't know who would serve more than 2 terms as mayor in Duluth prior.
I have no idea. I don't know. I wouldn't know. Anyway, well, there'll be lots of, and did anyone happen to see the Republican debate last week? It was,
I watched, the highlights that,
Yeah.
all the other news organizations collect and tell me
Yeah.
to, here are
Yeah.
some of the highlights, but I couldn't watch that.
Oh, just so you know, we're
Yeah.
recording still. The recording did not get turned off. So I think when the recording goes online,